Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce and FRAOMEN, I warmly welcome you to our today's webinar on remobilizing your workforce post-lockdown in India and Germany. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this webinar today is a challenge because post-lockdown in Germany, to a certain extent, has happened. Actually, in Germany, we never had a lockdown. We had a soft down. But in India, we still very much have a lockdown. Actually, in India, the lockdown is coming and going because in some cities, it was lifted. And then when the cases went up, again, it was implemented. So therefore, today it is really, really difficult to say where we are heading to and how the situation is going to develop. On the other hand, of course, we have to think ahead. And technically speaking, today we can already get experts, for instance, into India. The Indian government has allowed certain people to come. Of course, Indians can come all the time. Diplomats can come all the time. People with employment visas can also come. And as I mentioned, so-called experts, they can also come. And the experts, they come to reset plants, to put up machinery, and especially in the areas of pharmaceuticals and medical industry. So from that angle, getting into India is possible, but there are limitations because at the moment, we don't have flights apart from very special flights from Air India. As of this week, Air France is going to start flights, of course, from Paris, and Lufthansa is also working on flights. So far, Lufthansa can only fly out of India, but not into India. Now, these aspects we are going to look at during our webinar today, but we're also going to look at the topics of visas, because of course, we need visas. That is very clear. You need a visa. And all the visas, as you know, had been cancelled or had been basically taken aside. Even the famous OCI cards have been taken aside. And so from that angle, it is not so easy. But because it's not so easy, we have experts with us here today who are going to talk to you and guide you through the nitty-gritties of how to get back into India. And if I understand it right, now the next speaker will be Marius Tollenaer. He is one of our speakers. We have many more speakers, but I understand that the first one to talk is Marius, and then of course later we have Archana Mittal and we have Sebin Gini, who are also going to tell you more about how to get back into India. We have one presentation, so don't worry, not too many presentations, but I'm sure that the presentation will be, of course, shared with you later. So if you have specific questions on the presentation, that is also fine. And of course, at the end, we'll have a Q&A session of 10 minutes. So from that angle, it is possible for our participants to also participate actively. I think that was it for my introduction at the beginning. Thanks for joining us, and I now hand over to Marius. Is that correct? Marius, please.
That is correct. Hoping that you can all hear me. Thank you very much, Bernhard Steinrücker.
Well.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Welcome also from my side and our side. I should be joined by my colleagues Archana Mittal and Sebin Gini from Bangalore. I myself, I'm sitting in Frankfurt, and we are going to guide you through the next hour and a bit to help you mobilize your workforce, to help you navigate through these difficult times when it comes to visas, consulates, borders, and so on. We want to cover a couple of topics here today. So firstly, we are going to give you a little overview on where we are in India and Germany when it comes to COVID-19. And then we're going to go through individual pieces of a process that any one of you or your employees will have to be going through when it comes to traveling from India to Germany or from Germany to India. We're going to speak about visa processing, we're going to speak about borders and travel, and we're going to speak about quarantine rules. And from that following, we will going into what can you do right now? What is the action points that you have right now for your organization, for your employees? And from there starting, we would like to try to look a bit into the future, giving you what we think will be happening in the next couple of weeks, and then how you can manage your compliance as a company and as an employer, and the compliance, of course, of your employees as well who are traveling, to make sure your employees are safe, you are safe, and everyone comes to be able to be doing business quickly back in India and in Germany, and as soon as possible. We're going to have a bit of Q&A at the end. So I understand that we will be posting questions. We can post questions via the chat function. That would be questions being addressed to our colleague Anne Krieghaus from the IGCC. I hope I got that right. Anne, I think you're also on the line. Please interrupt me if you want to add anything here in this regard when it comes to posing the questions. But the questions asked via the chat, we will be reading out later in the Q&A, and hopefully we can address as many as possible of those questions. With all that said, let us start, and we want to start with just giving you a little overview on where we think we are, so we are on the same page when it comes to the following presentation. And with that said, I'm very happy to hand over to my colleagues here, and I believe, Sabin, it's you who is going to take the first slide and start with India here.
That's right. That's right, Marius. So good afternoon and good evening, one and all. My name is Sabin Jini, and I work as a director, and I'm based out of FRAOMEN Bangalore office, and I take care of the India inbound matters. So when I say India inbound, this primarily means working with clients and having them help them mobilize their resources to India. So let's quickly dive into and see, what's the current scenario with respect to the pandemic situation in India. So this is something that we've all been currently seeing in the news, that India is currently the third amongst the worst hit countries today with respect to the COVID positive cases. This is because we have crossed 1 million cases already. As on this morning, the number was about 1.16 million, and I'm sure the numbers have gone high. But on the positive side, if you look at it, the fatality rates are less than 2.5%. So which means it's a clear indication that the recoveries are happening, much faster, and it's much lower than, the percentage is much lower than any other country in the world today. So that's a positive side. But let's also look at what the government has done with respect to the measures, with respect to trying to control the spread of the virus. So sometime in March 2020, the government of India had imposed a nationwide lockdown, and this continued in 4 phases to contain the spread of the infection. States were also categorized into zones based on the extent of infections, and restrictions were brought in accordingly. So there were a lot of color codes given to these states with respect to green, orange, and red, and this is basically depending on the amount of infections that's spread within the state. Now with the lockdown, we've been able to control the spike to some extent. But on the flip side of it, if you look at, there's definitely been a slump in the global economy, and India is also, facing a share of the slowdown. But however, government has introduced a lot of relaxations to uplift economic activity and bring back stability. So there's a lot of money being pumped in as well into various sectors and try to revive the industry. Now talking about the unlock, now lock and unlock, we also have a few state governments that has imposed a lot of lockdowns based on the extent of outbreak. And as we speak, Bangalore is also on a lockdown until tomorrow morning. And there's just been an update that the chief minister has just provided an update sometime back. And as for that, I understand that there is not going to be an extension of the lockdown, so which is good news from an economic standpoint. So hopefully there's not going to be any more impact. I mean, at least in the near future due to the lockdown. So that's an overview as of now on India with the current pandemic situation. And I would pass it on to Marius, and let's hear more about what's happening in Germany. Over to you, Marius.
Thank you very much, Sabine. So we're moving on and briefly talk about Germany here. The slide is about to move any second. Here we go. In Germany, the numbers look smaller, but I just took the liberty. India has almost 17 times as many inhabitants as Germany, so 200,000 positive tested cases. That's positive cases, 202,000 at the moment, I believe. Sounds smaller than the Indian number, but we have totally different results if we take into consideration that Germany just has 83 million inhabitants. In any way, at the moment, we can see that the pandemic is under relative control. It's basically boiled down to local outbreaks and large cities and large industrial areas. You cannot say that COVID-19 infections are commonplace. There have been measures put in place which still make it possible to immediately react should it be necessary, but at the moment it is quite possible to limit those measures to local lockdowns and local restrictions. Overall, the situation is such that everyone is supposed to wear masks. Everyone is supposed to obey social distancing, and large-scale gatherings are still not allowed. However, business is possible, public transport is running, planes are also picking up again, and life and business are possible at the moment in Germany. The government has also come up with a quite successful corona warning app, which everyone is supposed to install on their phone, and it's a voluntary measure, but it's been picked up very well, and the local health authority institutions from the counties and the larger cities are supposed to track down individual cases and order people into quarantine should they have been infected or should they have been in contact with an infected person. But speaking from Frankfurt downtown, the life is starting and business is going. At the same time, this is my view from my window here, but of course the impact onto the economy has still been massive. Still at this time, we have almost a quarter of all employees in short-term work, which is a quite extensive and generous and successful program in Germany. And of course, that number, if that program was not around or was around with different measures, maybe that number would be lower, but that would mean that unemployment would be higher. Still, the GDP has taken a strong hit, and we're down in growth several percent. I think 6.3 is the number at the moment. So this has, of course, been a huge hit to the economy. At the same time, with all the government measures being loosened, business opening up, and the pandemic itself under relative control, we also see that opportunities arise and that expectations for the next couple of months. We may just want to call it mildly, to be mildly confident about them. At the end of the day, that's why we're having this webinar here, because we're hoping for somewhat better circumstances in the next couple of months, hopefully. With that said, let us move now into our business, which is immigration and travel, borders, visas, work permits, and so on, and give you a more specific overview on what is the status when it comes to having people travel for business and work purposes. And again, we're going to start with India, and I'm happy to hand over to Sevin again.
Thank you, Marius. Now, as always, I mean, if you want me to summarize what's happening with India inbound, with the Indian missions overseas, there's definitely a lot of commotion. There's definitely a lot of confusion. But let's look at this in more details. So right now, most of the consulates globally are accepting only OCI applications and a few minor consular applications as well. And the OCI applications are mostly accepted via postal only. The major consular applications are still being suspended until further notice. However, in between, there was a guideline that was issued by the Ministry of Home Affairs about bringing some relaxations to foreign nationals to travel to India on non-scheduled or chartered flights as allowed by the Government of India. And this is primarily for employment, business, and medical reasons, which is currently accepted as an exception, and only on emergency situations or for mission critical projects. Also, the ministry had introduced a process which is called as a revalidation process, which means we have a lot of our foreign nationals overseas but holding valid Indian visas, be it employment visas or business visas. There is a process that was introduced wherein ever since the visas were suspended, now upon critical travel, if there was any critical travel to India, the process was that they visit the respective consulates in their jurisdiction, get it revalidated, and then with an approval travel to India. But there seems to be a lot of confusion with this process. There are a lot of consulates who are not accepting the revalidation process, instead just issuing new visas, again depending on the criticality of the project or the emergency situation that they have in India. There are a few other consulates also saying that they are not even looking at a revalidation process, neither looking at a new visa, to get into India, instead saying that we will wait and watch till the end of the pandemic and then start issuing visas. But thankfully, in Germany, I mean, based on our recent experience, we've seen that they have been looking at revalidating a few visas. They are considering, to issue these revalidation for travelers to come into India, as well as depending on the situation, they're also willing to issue new visas for them to travel to India. So that's about the situation about the new visas. But with respect to visa appointments, it's very difficult. Unlike earlier, it's not easy for someone to just walk into the application center or the consulate, and submit their applications. Assignees are expected to go only with a prior appointment, and appointments are not that easy to get these days. Even if appointments are scheduled, there are clear instructions about what needs to be followed, when they visit there, in terms of the sanitization, usage of masks, as well as maintaining social distancing. So this is the situation with respect to the in-country FROs as well. So clear guidelines have been instructed. So along with an appointment email, we're also seeing that clear instructions in terms of what needs to be followed while they visit the office is clearly mentioned. Coming to borders and travel, we all know that scheduled international flights are all suspended until July 31st, until the end of this month. At the same time, the government had launched the Vande Bharat mission. This is sometime in May 2020, Initially, this was basically to bring back a lot of stranded Indians overseas back into India. But later, they widened the scope to also include OCI card holders and foreign nationals with ties to India as well. And later further relaxed the restrictions to also allow foreign nationals to travel on non-scheduled flights. And currently, we are on the 4th phase of this program. And the other interesting and an important discussion is something that we've also seen so much in news, which is the air travel bubble. This is nothing but bilateral agreements that's signed between countries. So as of now, India has signed these agreements with US, France, and Germany recently, and the discussions are ongoing with the UK as well. So this will definitely allow at least limited international flights to travel in and out of India. Air France, as I understand, they have begun their limited operations on the 18th of July, and United Airlines on the 17th of July. And Germany's Lufthansa are on the cards, and we are yet to receive details, on that. Coming to quarantine, and this is something that was mandatorily introduced by the government of India. This is basically to ensure to make sure that we are controlling the spread of the infection, and this is basically what's really expected here is upon arrival to India, there is a mandatory quarantine process that needs to be followed, which includes a 7-day institutional quarantine, followed by a 7 or 14 days of home quarantine, again depending on the state or city that the assignee is coming into India. And every state and city has their own protocol to be followed. Again, this is designed based on the amount of infection that is spread within the particular state. Now let's also see what's happening with respect to the in-country processes, or with respect to foreign nationals stuck here in India. So the in-country applications are being processed smoothly by the FRO and FRO as of now. However, we are also seeing some delays with Mumbai and Delhi, and this is basically because of the spike in the COVID positive situations there. We also get to know that there are a few officers who've been tested positive, and they are all managing their offices with skeletal staff, and there's a lot of delays with these two jurisdictions, and we could also anticipate similar delays in Bangalore going forward as well with the increase in spike here. However, on the positive side, there is a concession that is provided by the Ministry for Foreign National Standard in India, where visas expiring after 30th of June 2020, visas will be deemed to be valid for 30 days from the date of international flights resume. So what this means is that assignees don't need to necessarily go through a process, trigger a process. It is automatically deemed to be valid for 30 days from the date international flights start their operations here. But however, again here there is some confusion as well. Some FROs are still insisting that the assignees plan for exit permits before their departure, and this is also good in a way, because otherwise they will be questioned by a number of authorities as they leave the country. And coming to the visa conversions, change of purpose from a business visa to employment visa for stranded foreign nationals are still not allowed. So organizations will definitely need to keep an eye on this and make sure that they remain compliant, and their assignees are also compliant by making sure that they don't involve with hands-on activities on this while they're on a business visa, for example. So that's what it is from an India inbound perspective. And I would like to hand over to Archana. So Archana will talk more about the India outbound perspective. Over to you, Archana.
Thank you, Seven. Good afternoon, good evening, one and all. My name is Archana Mithil, and I head the Managed Services Program, focusing on India outbound travel. And today it's my pleasure to partner with IGCC on this event, and thanking them for trusting in us and for this webinar and sharing our knowledge. The insights provided by Seven and Marius have been quite eye-opening. There are a lot of similarities that I see on the outbound side as well, and as we see things progressing, we dealing with pandemic. We're also on the positive side. We're seeing certain European countries, certain countries in Southeast Asia opening their internal borders. Some of them have opened the international borders. The good thing out of this opening up was we saw VFS opening their operations in worldwide operations. With the worldwide operations opening up, we saw this change even in reflecting on India, which was a good indicator of what we can anticipate in the future. So looking at how VFS is operating, they have opened up the application processing for 15 countries in 11 cities in India. And if you see out of the 15 countries, the majority are Schengen countries and a few Southeast Asian countries as well. One thing to keep in mind, the VFS offices are accepting applications only where consulates and embassies have started their operations. So that's an aspect to keep in mind when we're looking at applications. On the Germany VFS Center, we saw Germany following the suit in terms of opening their VFS centers effective July 15th. And starting with Mumbai, where they started accepting the D-visa applications. The good thing or the differentiator, what we saw in Germany was they have prioritized applications for prolongation applications where visas were expired, for employment visa holders or students or family reunifications. So their applications are being prioritized until the August 13th. Across various centers like New Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Hyderabad. That gives an opportunity for individuals to really get together with their applications and start looking at moving ahead with their plans. Like Seven mentioned, there is a lockdown in Bangalore. The good thing is it's going to be lifted tomorrow onwards. So we hope the Bangalore Center, VFS Center for Germany will start operations from tomorrow, and we will have more updates in the coming days. The other aspect is on the reissuance of visas for Germany. The good thing is they made it very easy and easy for applicants to apply. The reissuance is free of charge, and which is definitely well received by individuals, and not too many countries have followed that. Now, we saw the VFS centers opening across the globe, and in India at least starting July 1st for a few countries. And in our practical experience, we have been successful in lodging applications for a few Schengen countries, European countries. And in our experience, the process has been quite seamless. The reason being that there are not too many applications at the VFS center, so applicants are finding it easy to maneuver through the entire process. Unlike what Seven mentioned on the inbound side, where appointments are not available, on the outbound side, we see appointments easily available, because what VFS has done is they have restricted appointments to a minimum number per day, so that every applicant is receiving attention, and there is no crowding of applicants at the VFS center. Not to mention, the COVID-19 precautionary guidelines do apply across all centers, and applicants are expected to abide by these guidelines. We've also seen VFS centers encouraging courier services once their visas are ready for collecting the passports. So individuals are not encouraged to visit VFS centers for collecting their passports once the visas have been issued. So courier services are a mandate in the current scenario that we see here. In terms of what changes that we anticipate in the coming few weeks is definitely with the focus on the healthcare. We do anticipate medical requirements becoming a mandate, just to ensure the risk of spreading viruses being controlled, and there is protection. We're also seeing how businesses are able to justify the need for individuals' travel in order to have their applications processed, so that consulates can give priority to these applications. In terms of the quarantine requirements, today when we talk about India outbound travelers, it is going to be important for every traveler to look at what the quarantine requirements and protocols will apply in their respective countries. And my colleague Marius will touch upon what the quarantine requirements are for Germany, for individuals, foreign nationals traveling into Germany in the subsequent slides. Again, these protocols are also going to be governed by the bilateral agreements between the two countries. So that's something which every individual must really watch out for, what applies to them in their scenario, and look at adhering to it, so that they don't run into further issues. With that, I would like to hand over the slides to my colleague Marius for him to take over the European region and specifically touch upon Germany. Marius, over to you.
Thank you very much, Archana. I am going to speak about the European and the German perspective here, and we are also going to cover visas, borders, and quarantine. In the last couple of months, we have seen that the European Union has become very active. The European Union has tried, and especially the European Commission has tried, to give some harmony to the national measures that had been imposed largely in March this year, and to give some kind of an idea to the outside world where Europe is heading when it comes to the lockdowns, the border controls, and the entry ban. And what we have seen, based on a quite strong recommendation from the end of June, many member states have jumped on that recommendation to actually modify their entry ban rules and come up with a system which is more looking at the country of origin and is more looking at who needs to be on the list of exceptional travel reasons to still come in, as well as trying to reduce to a minimum the internal border controls. Europe, of course, can help also to have some oversight on negotiating travel bubbles, although we see here that this is quite still a bilateral matter. We've mentioned it earlier. We have some negotiations going on here, and India also aims at forming further travel bubbles. There's talks with Germany, but as of today, we cannot fully say that they have come to full implementation. But with that European exit roadmap, Germany also has taken a lead in reforming its entry ban. As of 1st of July this year, other rules apply, which are not as strict as they used to be from March on. So what we see is that we have now a twofold system. There is a white list of countries which Germany says any travel, no matter short-term or long-term, and no matter the purpose, is allowed again. Currently, that's 7 countries. The list is going to be reviewed twice a month, and it's going to largely depend on the pandemic situation in that very country. Canada, Australia, New Zealand are examples of countries on that list. And India is not on that list. So twice a month from now on, there will be a chance to have this reviewed. And we have seen that even now for the change from the 1st to the 15th of July, there was a slight change in that list. So they are actually very closely reviewing the pandemic situation. The quarantine rules are always to be seen different, of course, from the immigration rules. When it comes to the whitelist countries, it's going to be highly likely that a whitelist country will not be on the list of risk countries as well. That's the whole point of the white list, which would mean that it's highly likely that a whitelist country, traveler from a whitelist country will also not have to serve quarantine in Germany. But we touch upon quarantine later again. For all other countries, and at the moment India is also in that group of countries, there's generally still the entry ban, but there's exceptions. And the list of exceptions has now just been significantly widened. Whilst we've had the usual exceptions all along, healthcare professional, healthcare scientists, diplomats, all other kind of special purpose travelers still are on the list, but they have now been extended significantly. And the most important change is that skilled workers and skilled, highly qualified employees can now travel again under the additional prerequisite that their stay is economically required, that there's a certain business criticality to the travel, and that the stay or the upcoming employment or assignment in Germany can neither be postponed nor performed from abroad. Another group which has now been put onto the list is foreign national students. Again, those who have to be in Germany. Obviously, that doesn't apply to distance learning students. It also applies to dependents who can again enter Germany. And by the list of the Federal Ministry of the Interior, it also applies to business travelers on C visas. India at the moment, as per advice of the German embassy, do not yet fully allow that travel. Travelers from India are not fully allowed yet as per the advice of the embassy, but they are on the list of the Federal Ministry of the Interior, which is the deciding factor here in order for India to hopefully be put onto the list as well when it comes to the business travelers. And all those exceptions are now not only applying for crossing the border, but also apply to who will receive a visa in the first place. We always have to think of the visa process as a pre-approval to being allowed to entering the country. So whatever a police officer from the federal police can do in Munich or Frankfurt, that usually should also be the guideline for someone applying for a visa. So whatever we say now applies both for the visa appointment and the visa processing as well as for entering the country. Let's take a closer look at the exception for the highly skilled employees. We have two requirements which need to be fulfilled cumulatively. Firstly, the travelers, the visa applicants, will have to be holders of a specific visa type. There's a specific list of visas which are now being considered highly skilled visa for that purpose here. And that list is the EU Blue Card. It's the regular work permit. It is the IT specialist for highly skilled immigrants without a degree. It's the EU ICT card for intercorporate assignment. It's the International Staff Exchange, in German referred to as Internationaler Personalaustausch, which is also supposed to be a permit for an intra-company transfer. And it also applies to leading executives, meaning managerial capacity employees. And in this list, we have now both permits which are requiring a local employment contract for someone to take up employment in Germany, but also like the ICT card and the International Staff Exchange permits, which are supposed to serve for assignments whilst remaining on the Indian employment contract assignment for up to 3 years. So that list is exhaustive, and other permit types cannot be considered at the moment. The second requirement that needs to be fulfilled is the travel needs to be relevant and urgent. So the upcoming activity, the upcoming employment or assignment in Germany needs to be business critical. It may not be possible to postpone it any further, and the assignment is impossible to be performed from abroad. So this means that an additional employer support letter is required in order to be receiving a visa, and also in order to travel into Germany. And the letter must specifically state why a specific person needs to really now get into Germany. You can work here with an additional confirmation, which just gives a clear point that the place of work is in Germany, that there are client obligations and so on, which may make it impossible for that job to be performed from abroad, and that it may now have already been postponed for several months, so it becomes critical. It cannot no longer be performed, and also the entire position that this person is about to fill needs to be of relevance for the company, for the division or the project that this person is supposed to work on. So with those two requirements, immigration is slowly getting possible again. We of course need to bear in mind that we still need to have the consulate open in the first place. And this is something, again, which the German Foreign Office will look after, just as Archana has also demonstrated on her slide, it based on the local pandemic situation, whether there are lockdowns and so on. And so this rule is now the overarching legal rule. Of course, you still need to have the consulate open in the first place to be able to obtain a visa under this new regime. It also, of course, still applies to people who still may have a valid visa and may have obtained it in February or March, and it may have been issued for 6 months, for example. In that very case, you, of course, already have a proper visa, but you still will have to have your employee prove the relevance and urgency of the travel right now. So you will also have to work with an additional confirmation letter, which proves that second point. For the cases, Archana already mentioned it, for the cases where an employee received a visa issued in February or March, and then they never traveled because of COVID-19, and the visa may only have been issued for 3 months. If for those cases, the VFS centers are slowly opening to offer that prolongation application and restamping of the visa. It's going to be performed without a fee, but you need to be quick, because the rule is currently that there's only going to be a small time window for that process. It's only going to be 4 weeks from the day the consulate has opened again. Now, this needs to be, of course, interpreted and applied, and I'm sure, depending on how the situation is, there may be some leeway in extending that rule, but we also, for example, now see that in some cities, the consulates are still closed, but the VFS centers are offering this service. So not sure where the start deadline of the official opening of the consulate will kick in here, but we'll take it as it is. But please also check with the consulates and the VFS centers, because this deadline is still absolutely in place, and it may be that in some cases it's already going to end again at about 13th to 15th August. So if you have those cases, they have to travel now, they had a visa, it's expired, unfortunately. Make sure you file those prolongation applications. It's still a little application, so to say. It's not the full package, but you still need to restamp and have the visa extended. What we can also very much recommend is to, wherever possible, file pre-approval applications with the Federal Employment Agency. So firstly, with that, you can make sure that you save time and don't lose too much time waiting for an appointment. And also you can have much better control in regards to which visa category will be issued, because usually the consulate will follow the decision of the Federal Employment Agency to issue a work permit in a certain category. And of course, then it should ideally be a category from the ones above. What you should also look at is make use and test out the new fast track process. Since 1st of March, we have the new Skilled German Immigration Act called Fachkräfteeinwanderungsgesetz. That's a very long word with many syllables, and yes, it is one word. And it's introduced a new process which is called Beschleunigtes Fachkräfteverfahren. We call it fast track process. It has had a bit of a poor start because all the show was taken away from the new bill because of Corona, of course, unfortunately. So we would love to be able to say we have now a lot of experience with initial fast track processes started in March or April or May, but that is not the case. So the fast track process is an additional process. It's a government mandated system where you can initiate a visa being issued at the end of the day by approaching your local immigration office. And what happens then, you pay an additional fee of 411 euros. And for that not so little amount of money, you will be receiving some additional service from the local immigration office, as well as legally defined maximum processing times to receive an appointment, for example, in 3 weeks' time, and to have the visa issued in another 3 weeks' time. You can make use of that process as well, and it may also sometimes help now with partial limitations for appointments and so on. Also, again, we've already mentioned the employer confirmation letter for the urgency. That's very important right now to be able to receive appointments in the first place. Also for the prolongation process for visa holders whose visa have expired, but also for the border crossing situation itself. I'm briefly going to touch upon the quarantine rules. I think it's very similar in all countries. The quarantine rules say that, in Germany, say that there's a certain number of risk countries. This list is also constantly updated, and if the country of origin is on that list of risk countries, a 14 days home quarantine has to be served. Home quarantine means that you're supposed to move into your home in Germany, and if in lack of a home, it could also be a hotel room or a serviced apartment. And if that is the case, you also need to notify the local public health authority, which we hear here and there sometimes do calls to check whether people really stay at their homes for those 14 days, and then you're good to go. The rule is you are subject to those rules if you have stayed in a risk country the last 14 days before the travel to Germany. If you want to avoid your employees having to go through quarantine in Germany, you can have them have issued a COVID test. If it's negative and not older than 48 hours, it's possible to avoid quarantine. You need to check carefully, however, which provider you use, because not all providers of tests will be accepted. And very briefly, when it comes to in-country immigration processes, we're happy to report that even in the worst times of partial lockdown in Germany in April and May and so on, the local immigration offices still did their work. So extension applications were processed all the time. Also, the address registration usually worked well. We actually have seen that many immigration offices suddenly noticed it's not really necessary to have all foreign nationals and their families report to all appointments physically, and suddenly they have realized it's also possible by mail, and it's also possible to send permits after the process has been concluded by mail to the recipient. And lo and behold, it has usually worked very well. And we very much hope that the immigration officers will have this as a learning, that physical appearance in an immigration interview is not always necessary. And also what we can also see is when it comes to the Federal Employment Agency, which is required to approve most work visa types in Germany, is still fully operational. So also the named pre-approvals are being issued at a good pace. Germany has also been quite generous to business travelers stuck in Germany. There's another interim decree which says that business travelers stuck here on a C visa are still good to stay here compliantly, legally, until the end of September. So that's the overview for Germany. We want to go on and talk a bit about what can you do now? What does that mean for you? And I'm happy to hand it over again to Archana and Sebin.
Thanks, Marius. So it's going to be very important while organizations plan their business continuity. They must also make sure that there is no compromise with respect to compliance. So coming to the business travelers, so as highlighted earlier as well, consulates are issuing new visas, and there is also this the new process that has been initiated, which is a revalidation of existing long-term business visas. So that is the other option. But again, all of this is available only on only on emergency or mission-critical projects. So it's not that whoever wants to travel to India during this time, they go to the Indian mission, apply, and then get the visas. No, that doesn't happen at all. There is a provision that's made available, and only on these certain conditions that they are allowed to apply at the moment. And the same goes with respect to okay, before going to the next point, there's been a lot of questions that we've been receiving from our clients with respect during these times with respect to what they can do, what they cannot do, and there are some points that we've covered here as well. We've also been asked many times if a foreign national who is stranded in India on a business visa, can they be allowed to work on employment-related activities? And the question is no. Also, they will not be able to work remotely, for their home country, sitting here in India on a business visa. So organizations will definitely will need to make sure that they are tracking all of their resources globally and making sure that there is no abuse of the visas, and they are making, there's no change in in the category or the intent of their coming to a particular country. Same goes for the employment and dependent visa holders as well. For already signees who already have a valid visa, they will be able to come into India provided they get their visas revalidated and upon good business justification or emergency reasons. But otherwise, there are also a few embassies who are also asking them to apply for new visas, again depending on the need. Now, we also have a few questions asking, clients asking us as to what are the kind of changes that can be done with respect to, assignees in India. And there are a few of them who've come and asked us whether they can make changes to their working hours, can they make changes to their salary, a reduction in salary, and stuff like that. So from an immigration perspective, it is fine for you to make changes in working hours and also bring in changes to the associated salaries. But the organization will also need to consult with their labor law consultants, tax and employment consultants as well to evaluate if there are any further repercussions to this. And again, visa conversions, change of purpose, this is strictly not allowed at the moment. And hence a business visa, for example, a business visa holder cannot perform any hands-on work or conduct any employment-related work here in India. Yeah, over to you. Over to Archana.
Thanks, Sebin. I think from the outbound perspective, like Seven mentioned, compliance is going to be essential. We're also seeing, the focus here on the outbound side, considering each country has their own guidelines in terms of what kind of application they're accepting. And in the last 2 weeks, we've seen certain countries accepting all kinds of applications, ranging from business visa to short-term and long-term. Certain countries, like Germany, is restricting to only expired prolongation applications. So I think it's important for businesses to really keep this in mind, to ensure individuals are applying for the right category, depending on what is applicable for their requirements and in their respective country. In order to ensure business continuity, we would recommend our businesses to ensure contracts, be it employment contracts or business contracts, to remain valid, so that individuals can travel out of the country as and when things open up from an immigration standpoint, or even in terms of the travel. That's another aspect which is going to be important. And another strong recommendation also would be to ensure business continuity, for organizations to track individuals who already hold visas, existing visa holders, so that they can be first mobilized when borders open up, and corporates can leverage on continued business opportunities, be it to support their clients or their local requirements in foreign countries. Marius, would you like to add your comments from the EU and Germany region on this aspect?
Sure, thank you very much. So when it comes to business travelers, we've just seen that Germany in particular has been quite generous on extending visas which have already been expired basically by decree. Similar things have happened around other European countries, but it's very important what also Sebin just mentioned earlier. If you have someone stuck here, you cannot just have them start working remotely on other projects, even for their home country. In a situation where everything would be normal, that still would require a work permission to be issued. And it's even possible that such a work permission could be issued even short term. It could even be that it is possible to get this through the immigration system in Germany in a couple of weeks' time. But it's just said that even with that very generous decree, which allows even the work purpose or the work permission that may have been granted with that short-term visa to be extended, it's still not fully possible to just change the purpose or the scope of the employment or have that person work from home, basically. When it comes to additional approvals, let us just reiterate, whoever now is about to travel into Germany, when it comes to labor visas, work visas, we will always have to have this additional relevance and urgency be confirmed by the employer. May that population or may that particular person be someone who still has to go through a visa process. It will play a role in the visa process already, and then it will play a role again at the border. Or may that person be in the population of those who just had their visa expire. Then yes, even for the prolongation process, they will have to prove urgency and business criticality of the employment. And also those who still have a valid visa but just didn't travel, again, they didn't travel yet, is to be said. I'm just opening another category in next sentence. So anyone who hasn't traveled on their new visa yet, but it's still valid, they still will have to prove the business criticality and urgency. Another case, of course, is when you have someone who has already in the past been working and living in Germany and happened to be in India, for example, during the last couple of months. Maybe they had a project there or they wanted to do an extended family visit and then Corona hit. For those, you do not need the additional relevance and urgency test, because anyone who is already registered in Germany and has taken residence before, they can travel back and forth given their flights. But again, one critical point, of course, for all of this, and I believe this applies into both directions, it's very important, of course, to bear in mind the border rules and the visa rules are one. What the airlines make out of it is the second. And traditionally, airlines are rather more strict than less strict because they have no interest in carrying someone who may then not be let into the country, which may end up with them having to pay deportation costs. So make sure that when you have someone board a plane, they are already equipped with the proper documentation and explanation in order for the airline staff to be able to review the situation as well. And again, when it comes to staff already in Germany, we've seen a lot of things being discussed about compliance of short-term labor when the salary factually is decreased, of course. Again, Germany here has been quite generous. It's possible to do COVID-19 related short-term labor situations without additional notification or approval by the immigration office. We still do recommend to notify the immigration office because it's still a change in the employment conditions which is relevant for the immigration office. At the same time, they do not have to have the work permit amended, and also any other employment conditions which may change now. Same thing as with the business travelers. Anyone who may be put onto a project somewhere else and by that has their job description changed, that may be something that the immigration office will have to approve. So notify the immigration office, apply for a amendment of permit before you have people in Germany start working on projects by remote working in other countries. I think with that overview, we would like to try to give a little outlook in what we believe could happen in the next couple of weeks and months. And I think we are already again starting with India here. So, Sebin.
Thank you, Marius. Before I just go to this slide, in the previous slide, I did confirm that from an Indian immigration perspective, it was okay for us to reduce the salary, but just wanted to highlight one important aspect here. We need to just make sure that while organizations are doing so, we need to make sure that the salaries are not going below the minimum salary limit. So that's an important point, and I want to make sure that all of you listening to this webinar are hearing it right. Coming back to the outlook, at least for the next few weeks, 2 months, till the time everything gets back to normalcy, what we really expect is we expect many more countries to come together and sign the bilateral agreements, and so like that we would expect at least more travel bubbles being implemented. With this, we will have a lot of travels happening, and until the borders opens up for scheduled commercial travel, we expect an increase in the number of evacuation or special flights for sure. We are already seeing more participation of private airlines to help mobilize larger population. So previously it only used to be Air India, but then now we have a lot of other airlines that have joined, to mobilize resources, many more resources. And again, on the positive side, we are seeing a lot of Indian missions who have started occupying, issuing a lot of OCA applications, and we expect other countries, we expect other consular services also to be picking up soon as well. So we're just hoping that happens in the near future. The risk of lockdowns, while the governments are implementing lockdowns to make sure that there's a control in terms of the spread of infection, state level lockdowns have been called to control the spread of infection. Bangalore is the most recent one to reinstate a complete lockdown for 8 days, which will end by tomorrow morning. In addition to this, the lockdown will also have an impact on economy, and these lockdowns will also have an impact on the number of flights that's going to be allowed to land in the receiving state. So that's on the downside of it. Coming to the new process steps and requirements, like I said, there's definitely going to be, continues to be a lot of confusion here. Please expect a lot of processing delays due to the additional reviews of applications and visas in the new processes that's been introduced. Please expect last-minute requests for additional documentation as well. And like I indicated earlier also, there is a lot of inconsistent approach that's been adopted by various authorities. For example, I did talk about the guidelines that was issued by the ministry on liberalizing a few norms with respect to having foreign nationals come to India. But in spite of that, a lot of these consulates are still having their own approach, based on their discretion. Hence, it is very important that organizations and assignees are, they plan their travel schedules in a way and have commitments in a way wherein it's a little more flexible. So that's going to be very important. Yeah, so that's from my side, and I would pass it on to Archana.
Thank you, Seben. From my perspective, while we seeing, countries and I mean India as a country and various states looking at lockdowns, this is definitely going to have a direct impact on consular operations. Like we said, Germany announced on opening their VFS center on the 15th, but then they had to really close it down until today evening. So we can anticipate, these changes depending on how the respective state is responding to the COVID-19 situation. And these lockdowns are primarily to curtail the spread and take precautionary measures so that the impact is minimized. We can also expect, today we can also expect Indians not having restrictions in terms of traveling overseas. At least at this point of time, as we are speaking, India has not had restrictions in this regard. So we've seen more and more countries, getting into bilateral agreements in terms of opening borders. If that happens, it's a good news. But then again, we will have to wait and watch how each country is responding to the COVID spread and looking at possibility of appointments and opening of operations for VFS, councils, and embassies. Today, as we are speaking, the appointments are easily available from an outbound perspective. But there is also an expectation that once things open up, more and more countries start their operations and states relax their lockdown. We can anticipate appointment scarcity once we see more and more councils opening their operations. Today, we see many states who had seen a peak in last few months. They are tapering down, and the new states are emerging, like Bangalore being one. So with many embassies being based out of Delhi, we do hope more and more embassies will start functioning and resume their operations in the coming few weeks. With that, let's hear from Marius how the outlook looks like for Germany.
Thank you, Archana. I think as we speak about a human disease here, probably most of the things are very similar. At the moment, we're still happy to say that the most likely thing are local lockdowns, and it may well be that this local lockdown may also be very strong. It may be hopefully as targeted as possible to a certain very defined geographical area, or even just a larger group of people who were possible to be tracked down in terms of contact trails and so on. But it could well be by a very recent change in the rules that this may even mean that people may not be able to travel out, and that they kind of have a limitation of their right to freely move out of that zone. What we of course also need to bear in mind, and now it's summer, but it's going to be may be different when autumn and winter come in. We will just have to observe. It's just possible that July, August, September, maybe October are the months where we just, from what we know from the spread of the pandemic, have relatively lower numbers. What we could also imagine to happen when it comes to new process steps and requirements is that medical tests will play an even larger role with the development of the medical technique behind the test. That may make a lot of sense to make sure that people who are actually not in a risk group, even if they come from a risk area, receive extended traveler rights. I already mentioned two further points here. We may see some good things coming from this as well. We see that the physical presence, of course, is the big problem in the visa appointment situation, but also here in Germany with local authorities, which just slows down their operation. And we very much hope that the good trend that we've seen in the last couple of weeks and months will persist and will become a new normal, where we may not have to have everyone report to all kinds of immigration meetings in person. So I think that's what we can see for Germany. Maybe let's summarize what we think you can really do now and in the next couple of weeks to react and to prepare properly for this situation. Archana, maybe you can give us the look ahead.
Oh, thank you, Marius. I think during this time when we are looking at planning, it's important for the business divisions to really chart out the roadmap for mobilizing the resources, looking at what are the key projects, looking at the existing visa travelers, existing visa holders. They can be mobilized and prioritize. Again, today we also seeing consulates and embassies really prioritizing certain category of travelers. So it's important that we understand those requirements for our respective regions and put our roadmap so that we are able to mobilize individuals and resources efficiently and effectively in the shortest manner. And now, while the current scenario is appointments are available in some countries, it's not available. As and when more consulates open up, we are going to see the shortage in appointments. So it's important for global mobility teams, business leaders to really start looking at initiating applications with your immigration partners. Take it to the level where you are keeping it to the filing stage in a ready to file stage, so that when the consulates resume operations and consulates start issuing appointments, we are able to file applications quickly. And of course we can anticipate delays in terms of processing times. Today I think we cannot go by with what currently was prevalent before the COVID-19 situation. So it's important really to expect delays in processing and accordingly plan business requirements accordingly. And of course, compliance we have touched upon, how important it is to be in terms of ensuring individuals are traveling on the right category of visa. So that's going to be the prerequisite. Additionally, I think, Marius, you did touch upon the quarantine requirements in Germany. And here, when we're looking at mobilizing resources into India, in terms of, it's also important to understand what kind of quarantine requirements are prevalent for while traveling into India. And from our experience, what we've seen, Ministry of External Affairs, the guidelines, each state is kind of given the power to really decide what kind of quarantine requirements will apply in their respective states. It could vary from 7 days to 14 days to 28 days, depending on how the COVID-19 situation is in that respective state and the city. We've also seen dedicated healthcare centers being assigned wherever individuals show signs of COVID-19 at the port of entry when they're arriving in India. so they will be, were requested to, be sent to the dedicated healthcare centers. The good thing is we're also seeing individuals with asymptomatic or smaller symptoms are also being allowed to do home quarantine with strict guideline and framework and protocol. You would see officers, if home quarantine is recommended, then you would see daily visits tracking being done to ensure individuals are complying with the quarantine requirements. Anyone who does not comply with quarantine requirements, there could be penalties and fines. So it's going to be really important to understand in which state or city the individual is landing in India. Keep that in mind and look at what aspects to be really taken care of before they move to another city. The other aspect is they might arrive in a particular city, and based on their international flights, it's also important to understand if there are any quarantine requirements if their final destination city is not the city of arrival. So a few tips on the quarantine requirements in India. We'll be happy to take any questions if there are any in detail as we go along. Moving on to our next presentation on compliance. I guess all of us have kind of touched upon this topic. What is the right checklist for mobility managers, business leaders? And we've really touched upon, spoke about compliance and being prepared for air bubbles. I would request Marius to really touch upon the workforce planning section.
Thank you, Archana. Yeah, what I want to raise here, we have touched upon a lot of points here already. Of course, you need to identify your population. Archana has talked about it, and then we just don't know really how many visa slots there will really be, and therefore it's really smart to be at the top of the queue. So if you have assignments and employments coming in for even a further away point in time towards autumn and winter, we would recommend to really file as quickly as possible. Just make sure that you don't have an unpleasant surprise regarding the waiting periods for the appointments, as well as for extended visa processing times. So as quickly as you initiate your process for the upcoming assignments, the better. You may even sometimes decide to start a process where you're not 100% sure whether that person will really be 100% needed, but better start it and then put it on hold for sometimes rather than starting it too late, only to see that waiting periods may have shut up into the months where projects could become jeopardized by that. What I also want to point out here is that you can of course also try to make the best out of that very still not very harmonized European picture. You may have employees in other European countries, in other EU countries, where you could make use of extended cross-border mobility rights. For example, ICT card holders who have an ICT permit, intercorporate transferee permit based on the EU legislation, on the EU rules, could very well be eligible to travel in a much easier process into Germany to serve in one of your affiliates or branch offices here, rather than having someone fully start the process from India again. You could also make use of the freedom to provide services within European Union member states, which again, at least since a couple of weeks, has become much less of a problem with almost all the internal border restriction lifted. Those are tools which can make it possible for you to have people on the ground much quicker than when you have to go through an entirely new immigration process. If you decide to do so and you are able to fully make use of your European workforce, of course you will always have to bear in mind that there's additional compliance requirements and notifications or applications to be filed. Yes, there's supposed to be freedom of many things: freedom to provide services, freedom of establishment, freedom of movement for employees. Yet the social security systems of the welfare of the member states have certain rules, which means that moving borders for even quite short-term visits to work in another EU country may require you to file social security notifications to the pension insurance fund, as well as do posted workers filings in the country of destination, which can be a very let's say can be a different process from country to country, with all EU member states still having their own rules. Just bear those additional notification requirements in mind when you want to make use of your European workforce, of course. I think with those points, we have kind of come to an end for now, and I would like to ask my colleague Sebin to give us some final words, and then we may want to open for the discussion.
Thank you, Marius and Archana. I mean, those were excellent points that you covered. While all countries, organizations, and people are adapting new ways to get back to old routines, the pandemic definitely has impacted the way we travel across borders. From our today's discussion, we have seen that the only way to tackle this shift is to be more vigilant about the changing policies, document requirements, and quarantine rules, all in an effort not to ensure immigration compliance, but also to adhere to the local laws. But before we open the session for questions, I would like to conclude by saying that while we are all reinventing ourselves to live with a new reality, we are hopeful that government policies will continue to evolve and eventually create a robust system under which organizations are able to safely remobilize your staff. Yes, so with this, we open the session for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebin. So we are now ready for the questions, and thanks to all the participants, we received quite a lot of questions to you. So the first one would be in regard to the quarantine in India. So what kind of facility types do you have to pass the quarantine in India? Would it be like a hotel, or is it more a governmental facility? So maybe Sebin or Archana, do you have any hints on that? Maybe that is also a question that can only be answered when you know where you are arriving in India. So I guess that also differs.
So Anna, just if Sebin can definitely add on to it. In our experience, there are dedicated healthcare centers which are governed by the government, depending on how critical the health of the traveler is at the port of entry. So that's port of entry is a place where they decide what kind of quarantine facilities that individual really have to abide with, whether it's a government facility, whether it's a home quarantine. So it could be a combination of that. And again, in our experience, we've seen states and cities really looking at different modalities. While there are published guidelines, we've seen a lot of confusion over that. And Sebin and his team has really come up with a great service model where we are able to handhold our clients with regard to the quarantine supports, given the lot of confusion that we see in practical and reality. So we are more than happy to look at any specific questions after the webinar, support wherever there is a need. So yes, that's it from my side.
Okay, so if there are any other questions to that, everybody can be free to just contact you directly also. So there's one more question to Marius. the question would be, do you already see an effect of the travel ban relaxations? Are the numbers of skilled migrants into India picking up already?
I guess it would be into Germany, but at the moment we are quite filled with inquiries and requests. We have to deal with the exact intricacies of how appointments are being granted, as well as with the new review of the relevance of and urgency of the travel. And of course, sitting in Frankfurt, I can always see that slowly the amount of planes per hour on the sky landing into Frankfurt airport is rising slowly. So yes, we see more traffic on the borders, definitely. When it comes to India in particular, we have seen the rules have been in place since 1st of July, but the consulates have to take it onto the local situation still, of course. So I guess we will be seeing even more in the last days of July, and then in the first couple of weeks until mid-July, August, I suppose. We hopefully see more consular openings and then more visas being issued quickly, and then even more travel.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I guess you would also recommend everybody to see that, in urgent cases, they apply for visas again. So see that this all hopefully works out, and that you definitely need a letter telling everybody that this is a very urgent case, so that, this process can be some kind of speeded up. What kind of document would that be? Do you think that would be just like a letter from the company, or do you need anything in addition?
Yes, the initial document, apart from the documents that the employee or SNE will have, like the employment contract and the job description, and the employment contract can help, of course, as well, because if it clearly says that the place of work is, for example, Düsseldorf, then that's a good indication that the employer has given thought to this. But on top of that, you will have to prepare an additional employer confirmation letter, which particularly and specific to the case, not in generic terms, but specific to the individual, points out why is that person business critical for us, why is it business critical right now, why does that person need to start right now, and why can that work not be performed from abroad? And the more granular and the more specific you are, the better. The authorities are unlikely to be happy with very generic formulations, especially if you're a larger employer. Imagine there's only very few visa officers in the consulates. If they see this same letter again and again, they may doubt the business criticality of the individual case. So be specific, be down to the detail, and give details as to why and how that person and that division and that employer may need that person right now.
Okay, so you would just suggest that, the more detailed, the better. So in case there is somebody who has a project in the near future and he needs a visa, and you want your supervisor to apply for the visa, you should add something where it says that this is really urgent, and that, that this is very high need that this person gets this visa. Okay, and very detailed information on that project.
Exactly.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I guess most of the questions are more or less answered now. If you have any other questions, or maybe have some very specific questions, you are also always free to contact the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce and, of course, FRAOMEN. Thank you very much. Oh, yes, there we see the contact details of Archana Mittal, Sebin Gini, and, of course, Marius Tolinari in Frankfurt. So if you have any questions, just feel free and write them an email. Of course, you're also free to always write an email to us. So thank you very much for Archana, Sebin, and Marius for the wonderful presentation. And hello, Mr. Steinrücke.
Yes, since we come to the end. Oh.
Yes, so I'm just, there you are again. So I'm just handing over to you for your vote of thanks, maybe.
Correct. Yeah, thank you very much. Quite a long session, but of course, with Corona, things have become more complicated. And since we are talking not only about India and Germany, we are talking about India and almost the rest of the world, it is quite difficult and will be a long time until we come back to normal. And that is why we need experts like our friends from FRAOMEN and of course here from Indo-German Chamber of Commerce. Maybe at the end, I have a question to the experts because it was mentioned. You were saying that OCI card holders can travel from Germany to India. Is that correct?
Yes, hi, this is Sebin here. Yes, a few categories have been allowed right now. That's right.
Because I understand the categories are limited and not every OCI card holder can travel. He can travel when his spouse is an Indian passport holder. And then, of course, in case the kids have OCI, then they can travel if one of the parents is an OCI card holder or an Indian national. So there are quite restrictions. So it's not that easy. And therefore, one really has to look into details like with all the other cases also. Therefore, as we mentioned earlier, look into the details. It's quite tricky. There have been relaxations, but only to a certain extent. So it's still a big spaghetti bowl. And therefore, thank you very much for guiding us today. And we hope everyone can fly safe from India to Germany, from Germany to India. And of course, we all hope that very soon things go back to normal. Thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.